Okay, Heather, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Your story's amazing, and I was so happy that you emailed us. And you actually heard about the podcast from the Follow Him podcast, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. Well, shout out to Hank and John. Love those guys.
Woo! Me too.
Well, cool. Let's go ahead and jump in. If you can just tell us like a little bit about you, just to give listeners some context, and then we can jump into your story.
Sure. I am living currently in Gilbert, Arizona.
Love
I
Gilbert. Shout out
I
to all the Gilbert people. I lived with a family, the Cutchin family in Gilbert, Arizona. Do you know them by chance?
no. No, but I'm kind of new here too. Yeah.
Okay. They're like my other family, my second family.
That's
But anyways,
awesome.
I
Awesome.
love Gilbert. So great place to be. Anyways, sorry, hijacked your
Really.
intro here.
No, I love it. We do too. We live close to the temple, and the church is big, but it's also small. The world is small. But I'm from Las Vegas, born and raised. I have 5 kids of my own. I am remarried, so I'm on my second marriage. Right now, I stay home because I have a grandbaby that lives with us part-time with her mom, and I help her a lot. And I have 4 grandbabies, and I absolutely love that part of life. It's the best thing. My mom always said that she should have been a grandma first, and I totally agree. Totally would have just hijacked that motherhood thing and gone right into just being grandma. It's the best. So,
Awesome. I love that so
yeah,
much.
yeah.
Makes me excited for my future years.
Woohoo! It's the best.
Cool, cool. Let's jump in. Jump into your story.
I feel like it needs a little bit of a backstory so that it makes sense. I was married in Las Vegas, like back in 1996, to my first husband, and he was a returned missionary. Felt like we were kind of doing all the right things that you're supposed to do. We moved to Springville right after and did the BYU thing, at least started that. He got a job doing living scriptures, the door to door thing and the travel to all the different pageants. And he ended up leaving BYU to pursue a job with them, like more fully in sales. And we had our first daughter and ended up buying a house and moving up to Salt Lake to be closer to Ogden. I was like 21 at the time, moved into this new house and new ward, and they called me as primary president. And that was pretty shocking for me. Then time goes by, I have another daughter, and we ended up moving back to Las Vegas in about 2002 for my husband at the time to pursue a career with my brother and going into business. And they ended up eventually opening up like a real estate investment firm there, and had another child. So we had 3 kids at that time. He was called into the bishopric. And then not long after that, he was called into the high council. So we were still in our 20s at that time. And then I was called into the Stake Relief Society presidency, which for me was one of the like spiritual highlights of my life. I felt younger and yet being with these most amazing women, just the best. Such great examples of everything. I feel like that a woman of God stands for. And not only that, but we got to work closely with the stake presidency, those, 3 amazing men, and they were just exactly what disciples of Christ look like to me. And then at the end of 2007, we had our fourth baby, which was another daughter. And then that financial crisis and the collapse of the real estate market all kind of happened or was happening. And things for our life slowly started to fall apart. I say slow, but at the same time, it was pretty quick. So 3 weeks after that daughter, her name's JC, was born, my husband then left town for a business trip. It was a week from basically. That was the time of year that the stake was planning, preparing, and even starting their ward conferences. And so I was busy doing meetings, and he was off on his trip. I was at a Relief Society meeting, and then I got home to meet a car repo guy that wanted to take my car. So I had to clean that out and give it to him. Our gas had been shut off. Like things kind of were, I feel like, falling apart and crumbling right underneath me. And then to make a very long and probably book-worthy story short, things were never the same between my husband and I. When he got home, he was a very different person, and there was a lot of things that had happened during that time that I wasn't aware of while he was gone, but of course learned it quickly afterwards. And so our marriage was falling apart, had fallen apart. The day I was supposed to meet with a divorce attorney, our daughter died suddenly. She, yeah, just died of, they say, well, her death report says undetermined, but it was basically like SIDS. So there was no rhyme or reason, nothing. She was healthy. Everything was fine. She was 2.5 months old. There was a lot of things that I had to do on my own during that time, meaning not with my husband, but I have the most amazing family. Like my mom, especially, is just the most incredible human being on this planet. She is my rock and my angel here on this earth. I have 4 brothers who honestly are just salt of the earth. Each one of them have great strengths. They supported me and continue to support me in all the things that continue to happen and go on. But during that time, my spiritual strength was born, like the Savior. My testimony of the Savior and his atonement was born during that time. I felt him carry me many days where I just felt like I couldn't go on without her, and also without the husband that I knew. I guess it was just such a difficult time for us. And as we were going to divorce, I just felt like after all of this, we just needed to try to hold on and hang on to what we knew. And we tried working things out. Shortly after that, to my utter shock, I was pregnant again. And our last son was born less than a year after burying our daughter. At that time, we were forced to move out of our home and lost our cars and business and everything that basically meant so much monetarily. So we ended up, doing a few moves or whatever within town. But in 2012, we moved to Texas. We just kind of wanted a fresh start, and we didn't know anybody there really or anything. We found a house, we bought a house, and we were just hoping for a new beginning. The church was different there, and not like the doctrine, but just, even like how far it was to drive to church, or the ward boundaries were so big and different from what I was used to living in Utah and even Vegas. I still loved it, but there was just diversity. And I learned a lot of things being there in Texas. I started working at the YMCA as a fitness instructor. And I realized that there's really good people out there who drink wine in the evenings to wind down, or who cuss, or, just have different lifestyle. And they're still really good people. I think being raised in Las Vegas, or just even in my own family, a lot of people say I was raised in a box, and I guess I was. I was pretty sheltered from, just the normal life, day-to-day life of different people that had different standards and values. Like I just had a lot of friends in Texas that were not LDS for the first time in my life. And that was eye-opening to me. There was a day that my husband came to me and said that he was reading this book and he wanted to show it to me. And he had actually told me that a couple of years before we moved to Texas, that he was reading this book on Freemasonry. And I was like, nope, I don't want anything to do with that. I guess there were just things that I had heard, and I just didn't want any part of it. And I just said no. And I was just pretty clear about that. In Texas, though, he again had brought that to my attention. And for whatever reason, I started to listen to him. And it took, honestly, a matter of minutes. I mean, it was less than an hour. We went into his office and he opened up the computer and started showing me all these things that he had been researching and studying. And I was just in utter shock. I had never heard of these things before, some of these things. And it's all church history stuff, Joseph Smith, church history things, blacks in the priesthood, all of the things that I heard little things, but I'd never heard so many of these stories. And honestly, it was minutes where I just was like, wow, the church is not true. Like we are being misled. And I was shocked at how quick it happened for me. And I want to point out that in church culture, at least, there's, somebody that leaves the church or somebody that has, these types of experiences, they must be doing things in their life that are contrary to the teachings of the church. Whatever, they must be looking for something or dabbling in things. And I have to disagree now because at that time, I was studying the Book of Mormon very fluently with even commentaries. And I mean, every single day, every day. And I had been since my daughter died. It just was something that I kept on and doing, and I was faithful at that. I had a temple recommend. I was going to the temple. I was fulfilling my callings. I was doing or visiting teaching at the time, and I don't feel like I was dabbling in anything. Like this came as a complete shock to me. I don't remember at what point, but we did sit down with our kids. It was pretty soon after we sat down with our kids and we told them that we were no longer going to be practicing Mormonism or whatever. And I still can see their faces, and that haunts me. My oldest daughter at the time, I think she was like 14 or something. She ran out of the house. Like she was so upset. Just doing that to our kids, it kills me. Then I booked a flight immediately to go home to Vegas so I could tell my family in person. I went to each person. I went to my mom's first because that's where I was staying. And she happened to be watching. We had just had General Conference, I believe. So it was just after that. And she was watching like rerun or whatever. And I'm telling her. And of course, she is just devastated, absolutely devastated. And so much because she was with me during this whole experience with my daughter dying, and just it was a shock to her. And she asked me, she was pointing up at the TV and she said, so what do you think about him? And it might have been, I think it was Holland given his talk, and I said, well, he's a great man, but they're all just misled. Even today, saying that just is, I don't know, it's just hard for me to even admit that I could even say that. But I felt so, I think, firm in how I felt. Like the transition, the change was just immediate for me. And she ended up having to have her bishop come over and give her a blessing. And it was just so difficult for her. And I remember going to, each one of my siblings, except for one. He heard it through my mom, and I'm not sure why I didn't end up going to him, but I think my time was limited while I was there. And each, little thing that they said, my youngest brother said, Heather, if you do this, like, just be careful not to badmouth the church. Like, don't get involved in that. Just feel what you feel, but you don't need to go on some rampage or, start some thing where you're badmouthing the church. And then he said, why wouldn't you go talk to your priesthood leader over this first before you just jump into this? And I think also church culture partly was that I felt like either we were going to be shunned or we were going to be, I don't know, pitied or something. And I was just afraid I wasn't sure. And I thought, well, what's he going to tell me? Is he going to try to convince me and try to explain some of these things that I've learned, and how is it going to make me feel better? And I mean, they are what they are. They seemed very true, I guess. And my oldest brother, I remember I called him and he had said, because he had left the church for about, I think, 10 years, he was like, Heather, there's a talking donkey in the Bible. And, he started telling me some of these things in the Bible. And I'm like, oh, okay. I guess I didn't know that. And he said, Heather, when I put my own happiness into my hands for all of that time, I was miserable. But when I decided to turn my life and my thoughts and actions back over to the Savior, things changed. Not that I didn't have struggles, but things changed when I realized that He is where I'm happiest. And, those things were all great at the time. Okay. But I was still convinced. Talked to my dad. He was just like, he didn't even care. It mainly like, this isn't going to stick. This is not you. This is not going to stick. I'm not even buying it. Like he wasn't even going to have it. Talked to a couple of my friends, on the phone. They just tried, especially when they went through some of those things with me before. And it was pretty shocking to hear me say these things now, just, 4 years later, just talking about President Holland's talk I think that at that very conference was the one, if you just, have that little desire to believe, just reminding me of those things. I don't think I even watched conference that year or so, but something that she had brought up, one of my friends had brought up to me. It was absolutely amazing. So just going through all of this, I started thinking, and I being still at my mom's, I go upstairs and I start to pray because at this point, I'm just going to pray now as a Christian woman. And I'm going to pray to this Christian Jesus because this is in my mind. This is how it unfolds. And I'm going to contradict myself quite a bit because I realize it was so hard for me after all that this was my entire life from birth until now to believe or to hear the stories of Alma and Nephi and all of that and Joseph Smith, all these things. But I'm up there praying and I was sobbing because this was such a big thing for me. And I wasn't sure how I was going to make this transition from being this, LDS woman and identifying as that to this maybe now Christian woman. And I'm up there and I remember thinking, is this how Alma felt being racked with torment? I felt tormented. And then I think, wait, if I don't believe that, how can I use that story? How can I say that? And then I would think about the temple and how much peace I would feel there. But then if I don't believe in Joseph Smith, then how can I believe in the temple and the priesthood? It just like all was so hard for me to wrap my head around and compute in my brain and make this transition fully. That was very difficult for me. I took off my garments for a while, which is really hard for me to even admit, but I did. I took them off. I switched over from reading the Book of Mormon to the Bible, the New Testament, whatever, because the Book of Mormon was not going to be a part of me anymore. And even at one point, I started wondering if there was even a God. I mean, that even gives me chills saying it at this moment. That's where things got really scary for me to think like that and what that means even for my baby, just burying her in the dirt and that's it. That's where it ends. And there's nothing after this. And I remember a friend of ours who lived in Texas near us said, well, people just believe in a God and the afterlife to help them feel better about that themselves, to help them feel better about death or dying or whatever. And I really thought about that. And that consumed me for a while. And it utterly scared me physically. Just I didn't like that for sure. I did not like that thought. I didn't want to believe that way. I remember we didn't stop going to church. At least me and my kids did not stop going to church. And I still to this day, I'm not sure why I kept going. And I think it was because I prayed that I would just know truth. Just help me to see truth and I will absorb that, whatever it is, because I did not like this turmoil I felt.
So
There was so
were you
much.
going to like a Christian church or were you going to the LDS church?
Same word, everything.
Okay.
I kept going. And I don't know why, even though I would sit there and I felt so uncomfortable. I don't
How
know.
did
And
your kids take that? Because like you like made this announcement to your kids and they were all shook up about it. And then you're like, well, we're gonna keep going. Like how did that play out?
that's a great question. And I thought of that last night and I called my daughter and asked her, who is now like 22, what she thought about that, because I hadn't thought a lot about it until just thinking of this podcast. And she said it was really confusing for sure. She felt really confused. She goes, I felt like we were keeping a secret, which we weren't. We weren't like, we were open about it for sure. But I think that's just that feeling that, you get when you're unsettled about something, and or you might feel some guilt, or you might feel sneaky, and it's just a Satan thing. I can only imagine how confused they would have been and why we kept going. I think I wrestled still so much. I did feel so firm and convinced that this was just like Joseph Smith was a fraud. That's what I would say. And that even kills me to say that now. And a friend of mine at church even came up to me who knew about my feelings. She was like, Heather, you do look so uncomfortable. You look like you're going to crawl out of your skin. And for a minute, I wanted to blame everybody else there. They're making me feel this way. But honestly, it wasn't them at all. I knew that. My initial like brain reaction wanted to just blame someone else. But I knew it was me 100% trying to figure this out and navigate through these conflicting feelings that I had. So I did finally go sit with my bishop, who, oh my goodness, thank goodness for such an amazing man. So I tell him the story, I explain everything, and I'm sobbing. And he said, after however long it took me, he said, Heather, this is amazing. This is so good. And I'm like, um, are we in the same room? Did you not hear what I just said? And he said, no, let me explain this. So he goes up to his whiteboard in his office, and he's drawing a staircase, and he draws me and a stick figure like at the top of the staircase. He said, Heather, you have reached a plateau in your life, and you need this. God has given this to you to grow you and to help you be converted and build your testimony. And I'm sitting there trying to understand his reasoning. And I can appreciate it, but I'm like thinking, I don't like it. I don't like this way. This is really tumultuous for me. He goes, I don't know all the answers to the questions, because I had a list of questions about all these things that I had, learned or discovered, I guess, from honestly, I thought anti-Mormon literature were like pamphlets, because we would get those in the mail growing up. At that point, I did not realize there was so much available of that online. I had no idea, which is crazy, I guess, again, just being naive to things. But he said, let me set you up with a guy in the ward who is a gospel scholar. They're about to move, but let me set you up. And he did. The guy came over like probably the very next day. And I asked him several questions. And honestly, I really didn't feel great about the responses. I didn't feel like things were answered completely for me, like to my satisfaction, I guess. And I was so appreciative of him and his knowledge and his testimony. That was great, but I didn't feel like satisfied. I sent an email to a man in our previous stake presidency who, I mean, I loved all three of them, but this particular one I sent, and he ended up responding to none of the questions. He didn't really even go there. He just basically said, it's so good to hear from you. I hope your family's doing well. I'm always available to talk if you ever want to talk. And that was it, like just so quick. And I was like, I wasn't sure how to take that. I even tried to look up what the questions were, but then I was afraid to dive into that. So I found the email, but I didn't even read it, because I just, even still at this point, I don't want to be reminded of some of those things, because I think I'm a little embarrassed for, I guess, just quickly believing without doing my own research. I think because I trusted my husband at the time. I don't necessarily think that he was a gospel scholar, but he was definitely very knowledgeable in the gospel. Very knowledgeable. He's very intelligent, smart, retained everything he read. I trusted him. So I went along with it just because. So I felt like there was some damage done, like a lot of damage done. I think it damaged my heart. I felt like betrayed even by the church. And I didn't know how it was ever going to be resolved. Like just by talking to somebody wasn't sure about that. But I ended up going to talk to my Relief Society president. I thought, okay, I'll try her. And I did feel really good about some things that she said to me, especially about Blacks in the priesthood. For whatever reason, she just related some things from her mission or whatever. And I felt like, okay, all right, I could see that. That seemed logical. Her reasoning seemed logical. And then I had a Black friend in the ward who I love to pieces. And she then shared some things with me, how she didn't even learn about the Blacks in the priesthood thing until she was on her mission at Temple Square. And that like sent her into this tailspin. But she just kind of explained how she was able to resolve that in her heart. And that really helped me to hear that directly from somebody that affected so much. So at this time, my husband was the ward mission leader in the ward. Like when this all kind of went down, there was this barbecue scheduled for the neighbors in the ward to come over and have a barbecue and invite their non-member friends or whatever. I had invited already before this had happened a friend of mine from the YMCA who I'd become close with, not familiar with our church at all. But she came into my house and she said, I feel differently here. Why? Why? Like, what is it about you? What's like, she didn't know that this was like a religious barbecue or that, this was things that like we were all asked to bring a non-member friend. We had this really big painting of Joseph Smith over our fireplace, and it's a beautiful painting. And she was like, who is that? Like, she was so, I don't know, genuinely interested. That could have been such a great opportunity, but instead I totally jacked that up with her. I steered her away from Joseph Smith. I said that we had been misled and that we were following this church that was, not true and leading us astray and all these things. And I so regret that with all of my heart, just what that did to her potentially, hearing the gospel. I just pray that someday she'll forgive me and that she'll have another opportunity with someone who can truly, bear testimony. That's basically the story in a nutshell. Just for me, it took a matter of minutes, but it has taken years to come out of that and start repairing some of that damage that was caused from all of that. I tried to look it up, either Packer or Faust. Somebody had given a talk about a testimony and how your testimony is born in sharing it. And I had the hardest time with that because I thought, I can't just get up there and lie. Can't just make up stuff. I didn't know how I could bear my testimony and then all of a sudden just have a testimony, but say the things that in church culture, what we normally say in a testimony, I guess. So it took me years and years to get up and be able to say that. I could not continue in my calling. I was primary chorister at that time. And that is one of the best callings in the church, in my opinion. But I just couldn't get up there and bear my testimony to these little minds, these little people. And from then on, I just thought, if I'm going to go down, I'm not going to go down without a fight. And I'm going to fight through this because this is all I've known. This is what I've known. I dabbled in things that I shouldn't at that time, like word of wisdom things and other things, even just taking off my garments. I felt so bad doing that. I realized, you know what, if it is all wrong, if we are being misled, what harm is it that I try to keep my word, which would be, keeping my covenants? Or I want to treat my body good and put good things in it. Okay, that's the word of wisdom. Or that, I want to pay to a charity. Okay, I pay tithing. Like, these are normal things that people do in life. And I just happen to do them within this church that I do love. And I can't say that I know. I cannot say I know things the way that I hear other people get up there and say, because I don't. But I do feel and I do believe. I know what I feel in the temple. I know what I feel when I think of my baby girl. Her death was so difficult, but there's such a beautiful spirit that surrounds a baby when they come into this world. I feel like the same feeling when they leave. It's just so tender and beautiful. And of course, I would want it differently, and I would want her here with me. But how can I forget how I felt then and the spirit that was so strong there? I can't just imagine that she just was buried in the dirt and I'll never see her again. And I don't want to believe that. I don't want to believe those things. So I think that's where I'm at. That's it in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, like, when you met with your bishop and he's talking to you about the stairs and the plateau, just tell me more about like what you've gone through, like processing that information and like getting off that plateau. What are some of the experiences that you've had or like that you feel like have made this all worth it?
As growing up, I took my parents' testimony with me of Joseph Smith and all of those things. I didn't feel like I ever needed to go through my own testimony builder with Joseph Smith. I just believed that until I learned all these things that are being said about him. So, my husband now, who is perfect for me, he is just
And then when
amazing.
did you marry him?
My previous husband, we got divorced in 2014. So, this all happened in 2013. 2014, it just was over. And so 2015, we got married, me and my husband now. And we met on match.com, which is so crazy. And married like 4 months later. So
Awesome. I
the
love that.
best. He sat down with me a little bit and we talked about some things. And then just even like 4 years ago, and we've been married like 8 and some years, but like 4 years ago, he took me to Nauvoo. And I never had any desire to go to Nauvoo. Like it just seemed boring to me. I don't know. That was just kind of my thing. But oh my goodness, it was actually right after COVID and still kind of during some of it. So there wasn't people there. There were the missionaries there, but there wasn't like crowds and it wasn't busy and packed. And I felt like we could go do all these tours and learn all these things I had never known before, actually. And it just like definitely is exactly what I needed. There was a missionary couple there who was just older than us, but they had invited us into their home right there on right by the river, actually. Their testimony of church history and of Joseph Smith and the Savior and all of that just was so beautiful to me. And just the tours that we did, we went to Adam on Diamond and there was this amazing thing that happened at Carthage Jail. I had been to Liberty Jail because living in Kansas with my husband, we lived kind of close to Liberty. So we had gone there and taken visitors there or whatever. But Carthage, I hadn't gone to before. And it happened to be this day that a family had come for a family reunion. And there was a guy there, like college age guy. I mean, he was in his sweats, like total travel clothing. I guess we went up to the room where John Taylor sang the song, Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief. And they usually would like just play a recording of that song. But this guy's mom put him on the spot and said, my son is a music major. He's about to graduate and he knows this song. And would it be okay if he sang the song? And he got up and sang that song so beautifully. And music speaks to me. The spirit speaks to me through music so many times. I mean, nothing even specific, but I just feel the spirit in songs so much. And that right there, I don't know, something transitioned for me there. Just the beautiful, I don't know. It was just so real life for me that he was standing up there singing so beautifully and knew the words and was so put on the spot and yet did such a rockin' job at it. That was a really important thing for me to go to Nauvoo actually and just put myself in those shoes of some of these ladies and just the people, just what they experienced. That was something that I needed. So I think it was just my desire to want to know truth and to be open to the fact that I think a big one for me is that, and I think this was in Holland's talk too, which is funny, but how he works with imperfect people every day, but he deals with it. And I think, yeah, Joseph Smith was an imperfect man. I mean, and so am I. And how Uchtdorf says, or the bumper sticker that said, don't judge me because I sin differently than you. But I think we're all here on this journey and none of us are perfect. And I think I had these expectations of prophets and people that said things about blacks and different things about, Joseph Smith. I had these, I don't know, expectations of a prophet. A prophet should, hold themselves to a higher standard and they should behave this way and say this and say that. But honestly, at the end of the day, we all are just imperfect mortals that are working our way towards perfection one day, just not anytime soon, not here. So I think that was a big pivotal thing for me, is just realizing that there are human beings and they're not perfect.
Mhm. And now here in 2024, you teach gospel doctrine.
Oh my goodness, that is terrifying. And you know what? I do think the church has listening devices in the chapel, because I had
Oh,
said that in the chapel about 3 weeks before I got the calling. I was talking to my friend and I'm like, oh, gospel doctrine, that is a calling I would never want. It terrifies me. And then I get the call. Again, that's, I guess the Lord, knows that I need to grow and learn more about the doctrine or whatever. Thankfully we have a good ward who offers me grace and who participates so well. I'm so grateful for that. So,
I love
yeah.
so much. So
Yeah.
amazing. I'm sure that being somebody that teaches gospel doctrine, it's like you're learning so much yourself. It's like that I think that would probably be the coolest part, but
It's,
it's
yes,
just what
truly.
you learn yourself as you're preparing.
I'm experienced at teaching, because I did the gym for, 10 years. I taught at schools, and I've taught, Relief Society gnomes, all the things. I'm comfortable with being in front of people teaching, but it's when I know the content. But now you're asking me to teach doctrine. I could teach principles all day. I could teach a gospel principles class all day. That'd be great. But gospel doctrine, that is a different world. That you got to know stuff. And
Yeah,
thankfully, I tell them that I don't profess to know anything and that I want to learn from them. And I think we have a great little understanding there.
I love that so much. That is so awesome. You've really like just come full circle, and it's cool to just see how you are in this place of like spiritual maturity now where it's like, oh, like I can accept that everything is imperfect in the past. And wow, I can see these things. And it's also interesting to see how throughout your whole journey of this is misleading, this is wrong, throughout that whole journey, it's like you didn't fully step away. You still kind of were involved. And that's really interesting to see that.
Same. I'm not sure why or how, but I think it was because of habit too, because that's
Mhm.
what I'd always done. I did not know how to live in this world without that. Even the culture, and sometimes the culture drives me absolutely crazy.
Mhm.
But even without some of that, I didn't know how to be a mom or a wife or anything without the gospel. How would I do that? I tried. I did try, other than, keep going to church, but I tried to do it a different way, and it never seemed to work for me. So
So what advice would you have for somebody that just like is being confronted with this all of this information for the first time and they're starting to spiral? What advice would you have for them?
I guess for me, I stay very clear of that. And maybe that's walking blindly, but I think it's easy to get caught up in people's stories and opinions, and the media. They can easily sway people just like that. It's so easy. So I stay completely away from Google, like anything LDS on Google, because sometimes there's things on there that you think is good and right and true, and you click on it and it's like all this anti stuff.
Mhm.
And they do that to get you to click, but I just stay away from that. And then I go to what I do know. I know people are like, well, knowing that this happened, and like even like the Meadow Mountain massacre, that like there's really not a great I have yet to hear a good explanation for that. And it is the most tragic, horrific story. People are so analytical and logical. They want those answers to be full and complete and to their satisfaction, just like I did. And I wasn't settled until I felt like I had that.
Mhm.
But then I realized there just doesn't seem to be perfect answers for all of those things. And so much of it is very misconstrued for the sake of, somebody else's, I don't know, benefit or satisfaction. A lot of those things are not exactly accurate. And I just say, be so careful, stay away from it, and not to stay away from it to be naive or to just follow blindly, but go to the right sources. Honestly, I don't even know if that helps, because I think when you're right down in the thick of it, sometimes even that is like not enough to hear. Like you're just trying to hide things. And definitely, I don't think they're trying to hide things. I think they want you to know the truth. Like there's more to that story than what, those people that write those things or relay those things, they're leaving out things, definitely. And then they're missing timelines and intentions and all of these things. And, you can't fully convince people who are so convinced themselves on the opposite side. So I just say, remember how you have felt at other times. There's been times that we all have felt the spirit, and how can we deny that? You have to go back to that.
Hmm. I love that so much. Well, Heather, your story is amazing. I'm so glad that you reached out. You have a unique story and it's so beautiful, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast and share your story. Is there anything you want to leave listeners with before we wrap up?
Well, I'm actually going to launch my own podcast, and it's going to be more about grief and how you come to the other side of grief. And that, since my daughter died, that's been something that I've been very consumed by, because when she died, I remember before we even buried her, I was like, I came in the house and I said, I cannot feel like this. I don't want to feel like this. I did not like how that felt. And there's no way around it. I tried to avoid it. I did everything I could to not have to feel that. I hate that feeling and that emotion of sad. And then what goes beyond that, which is something, sometimes so hard. But I realized that this experience too caused me so much grief, because grief is not just about losing someone. It's not about just death. It's about a change in a familiar pattern or behavior. So it could be something super small compared to death. It still can, surface those grief feelings and things. So I want to be able to offer hope to people that there is light ahead, and there is hope, and you can feel better after going through something like that. And I did not think that at the time. I thought, I'll never be able to feel happy again. How can I ever even smile or feel joy knowing that one of my own children are not with me?
Hmm.
But divorce and losing all of your things and having to rebuild, and there's just so many things that can cause grief, and
Hmm.
I think that with the savior we can get through it.
I love that, and I agree wholeheartedly. Well, thank you so much, Heather. It was so great having you on the podcast.
Thank you,
And I
Ashley.
know your podcast will be so successful, and I'm excited for you.
We'll see. Thank you so much. I
Yep.
appreciate it. It was so good to meet you.
So good to meet you. A lot of people have asked us how they can support the podcast, and we have created a Comeback Podcast merch line on our website, www.comebackpodcast.org. All of the money made from the merch goes right back into the podcast. So if you are interested in supporting the podcast, and you want to purchase some merch, we would love it. Check it out. Thank you so much for being a supporter of the Comeback Podcast and listening to our episodes. It would mean so much to us if you would like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps other people be able to find us, and we want to share this message to everyone.